Tonight, should we have the right to ignore our boss's calls and emails after hours? The COVID crisis changed the way we work forever, with working from home the new normal for some. But others are raising concerns about that change. Joining us tonight, the Minister Tony Burke and Opposition spokesman Paul Fletcher. Sally McManus represents the voice of the unions. Businesswoman Carolyn Creswell is the founder and CEO of food empire Carmen's Muesli, while Dom Price is a work futurist at Atlassian. Welcome to Q&A. Hello, I'm Patricia Carvelis. I want to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on whose land we are meeting. Remember, you can live stream us around the country on iView and all the socials. Quandra is the hashtag. Please get involved. To get us started tonight, here's a question from Sydney Montero.
What is the right balance of working from home versus creating a team culture that values in-person connections, mentoring, and water cooler conversations that have its own benefits for an organisation?
Dom.
Yeah, I think balance is a fascinating topic here. I think there's a whole argument around everyone should work from home, and there's a whole argument of bringing people back to the office. I think what that question shows us, and Atlassian's position on this, is the adults should choose. If you hire fully formed adults, enable them to find the thing that actually works for them. I don't think we have a single person who works 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, and we've got a few people that work from home, but it's an 11,000 person workforce spread all over the world. Now, the important thing in that question is connection. There is the human side to work that we cannot forget, and often that means we come together. We have a thing called intentional togetherness, where we bring our people together wherever they are in the world to spend that time to build connection and belonging and a sense of achievement together.
And do they have to do that physically?
They have to do that physically, and it's 3 or 4 times a year. It's not a huge impediment, but we find the majority of the time, knowledge workers, and we are privileged to hire knowledge workers, can actually operate from anywhere. They are untethered from the office and have been for years.
Carolyn, how does it work in your business?
Yeah, well, I think what Dom said is just incredible. It's very similar. I think, though, that there is a human connection, and we find that a lot of people want to come back to the office because they actually enjoy it more. Often people say, look, it's convenient to work at home, but did I love that day working from home? Whereas often we're finding people who come into the office say, you know what, I actually had a great day at work today. Yeah. So it's building that culture and the sort of camaraderie that I think is super important.
Do all your workers work in the office, or do they work at home?
Well, it's very similar. We don't have anyone that works 9 till 5, you know, Monday to Friday.
But when they're at work, whatever times they are, where are they physically?
So sometimes at work, sometimes in the office, sometimes at home. And we also have a work from holiday policy. So sometimes when people are going on holidays, we say, if you want to work half days from holidays, we allow them 5 days a year to work wherever they are in the world.
Work from holiday?
Yeah.
Sounds relaxing.
Yeah.
What's the benefit of working from holiday?
Well, because for school holidays, you might say, hey, you know, my family wants to go, you know, we're going to go to Bali for 10 days, but I'm quite happy to work 9 till 12. And I'm happy to keep up, or they might do that 3 days a week just to keep on top of my workload. And that's 5 days of the year that they haven't had to take out of their leave policy. And it's been super successful for us.
Yeah. Sally, how is this looking in terms of industrial rights? Because the union movement's actually pushing for workers to be able to demand the right to work from home.
Well, I think it comes down to a bit what they were both saying. Number one, work from home. For those who can, we've got to remember heaps of jobs you can't, but for those who can, is here to stay. It absolutely is. And it really comes down to good negotiations, not one-way negotiations, negotiations that take into account the protections you need to have for workers as well, because we don't want a situation where it's some people that are expected to work from home, for example, women, and that it entrenches, you know, a whole lot of inequities that way too. Also, if you are the one that's working from home and you're not seen in the office, you're going to miss out as well. Some of the things that have been said about culture are true, but there's an assumption to say too that you can't build that online if you work really hard at it as well. I think there's it is very important to bring people together at times as well. But if you negotiate this, and unions are doing this all over the country in agreements, it's a two-way street, not just a one-way street.
But you're pushing for an appeal to the Fair Work Commission for some workers, right?
Where it's reasonable. So that would be the point. So
give me a scenario that you think there should be a right that currently doesn't exist.
Well, there's some workplaces where you'll have some of the workers working from home and an employer might say, no, I'm not going to let you do it. Well, I would say that's unreasonable. If the workplace already has been shown that it can work and an employer's just deciding to say no to you, you should be able to appeal that. That's what we're after.
OK. And Tony Burke, is that something you support? Does the government support workers having greater rights to demand working from home?
Yeah, one of the things in the first major bill that we brought in within those first 6 months, Secure Jobs, Better Pay, most of the attention went to multi-employer bargaining. But one of the things we put into that bill was to change it so that workers didn't just have a right to ask, it couldn't be unreasonably refused. And to start to get rights where that could be contested in that way. Now, as Sally said, there's lots of jobs where you'll never be able to work from home. I mean, my part of Sydney during the pandemic, during lockdowns, the virus kept spreading and people said, oh, people breaking the rules there. And it was, no, they have jobs you can't do from a laptop and they have to physically go to work. So there's lots of jobs where it won't be possible. But where it can work, even... Look, there's one thing I think we learnt during those really tough couple of years was that a whole lot of things that we thought were impossible actually work for everybody. And that's really opened up a lot of conversations.
A lot of murmurs of agreement in the audience. Paul Fletcher, should it be a right that's further entrenched for workers?
Well, clearly what the pandemic triggered was that it made us all realise that, number one, there was the broadband connectivity. Number two, we all had the devices. Number three, there was the software. You know, we shouldn't forget that 20 years ago, it wasn't technically possible. No. So it's all changed very quickly. In fact, there was a book written in the late 90s called The Death of Distance, which predicted what, in fact, took until about 2020 to happen. So sometimes the rate of technological change can be so quick that we don't even notice how much things have changed. And it does take a little while, I think, for human behaviour and human choices to adapt. We've learned about the strengths of working from home, working remotely, but some of the downsides, I think for younger workers, I think it's quite challenging because one of the ways that you learn in the workplace is by observing others, by those informal interactions. And I certainly observed some younger workers, I think, really struggling during the pandemic where they were told to work from home, but they really hadn't been able to build up their networks within the company. So I think it works very well for some, not so well for others. And I think the principles that have been talked about in terms of choice are sensible ones. And let's bear in mind, most workers and most employers work it out without the help of a union because only 8% of private sector employees are members of a union.
OK. On that question of
Except
women...
we negotiate it for everyone, whether they are or whether they're not.
Whether they want to have you negotiate for them or not, yeah.
OK.
Well, no, everyone gets to vote on an agreement.
Yeah.
Like there's 360,000 extra Australians covered by agreements compared to what there were a couple of years ago. Like a lot of this is happening.
None of which changes the fact that there are plenty of people who can work it out without the help of unions. Look, unions have a role in society, but what you're determined to do is try and force unions into a bigger role through using legislation.
That's not true. That's just ridiculous.
Completely
So
true.
ridiculous.
Q&A has begun. I declare it open.
Because we've got the union movement and the political arm of the union movement.
I'm interested in the point you made about what might happen for women. Now, I've spoken to women who are also concerned that this flexibility is just all about women doing more work.
Well, situations where there's an assumption, oh, the people who are going to want to work from home are those who are going to be responsible for childcare. And so, in a way, it's entrenching that it'll be women that will be doing that are more likely then to miss out in lots of other ways and not change those roles as well. So we've got to consider that when we make decisions around this and when we negotiate it, workers with employers, that there's some of the issues that get brought to the fore because, things can advance society and make things better for everyone or they can take us backwards.
So there is actually, in your view, a risk with this?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not, I'm not saying it's a panacea. I'm not saying it is, and also not for everyone. I think the point actually being made about young workers is a valid one. Mentoring, the informal discussions that happen. But all of those things are also a mix, and a lot of the places where we've negotiated agreements, it's been hybrid, and that's allowed sort of the best of both worlds. I think people living in a lot of our big cities have to travel a long way to work, and with especially having to pay for petrol, there's a real benefit working from home.
Next we'll hear from Simon Potts.
Hi, thanks for having me. I guess my question's mainly to Mr. Burke. As a small business owner, I'm increasingly concerned about what seems to be a significant bias in recent industrial relations reforms, which tend to favour employees often at the expense of employers. So, for example, the right to disconnect focuses on protecting employees' personal time outside of work hours, but it doesn't address employees using paid work time for personal matters, such as private calls on their mobile phones or engaging in non-work related activities during business hours. So obviously fair work environments are important. So how can the government ensure that its policies support both the workers and the small businesses that employ them?
Tony.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. There are common interests. There are common interests there. And one of the things where the question goes to the example of, what if someone's using their work time for personal use? The employer already had, and has had forever, the power and the right to crack down on that if they're not happy about it. The right that wasn't there was if the worker was being unreasonably contacted outside of work hours, outside of paid hours, to be able to push back. Now, effectively, the right to disconnect just takes us all back to the right to our own time that people had, say, 20 years ago. 20 years ago, if someone was on call, they carried a beeper, and if the beeper went off, they'd use someone's landline and they'd call in. And you knew you were on call and you were paid an allowance. Then, all of a sudden, we all started carrying our own beepers. And it started to drift so that you've had a situation where a lot of workers are being unreasonably contacted constantly and didn't have the right to push back. So what this right means, the employer is still able to reach out, but the worker has a right that catches up with modern technology, where they can now say, that email can wait till Monday. But obviously, if there's something that's urgent, if you're the only person who's got the alarm codes or the give and take that's normally there, then you're going to respond. But if it gets out of hand, there was a right for the employer always to crack down on what happened during work time. Now, for the first time, there's a right for the worker to defend their off time.
Simon, a whole bunch of people who are very sick of getting emails out of hours, I'm guessing there. But Simon, what are your concerns about it? Because how does it affect your work? What is the concern that you hold?
Well, one of the issues is employees using personal time during work hours, and I don't think it's as straightforward as what Tony is making out, because, disciplining employees and things like that often damages workplace morale and stuff like that. So it kind of feels like the government's backing one side, but not so much the other. Like, I didn't really understand the purpose of this law in the first place, because people I speak to, in my experience, is that employees do personal stuff during work time far more than bosses contact employees outside of work hours.
Okay.
So to me,
has that been a problem in your business, and have you ever used the laws that Tony refers to?
which laws are you talking about?
Well,
sorry?
the ones he referred to, where you can discipline workers or say, hey, you're spending too much time looking at, real estate websites.
I have had to speak to workers at time and, bring them back into line and stuff like that. But sometimes you get pushback and things like that. So, it's not always easy and straightforward. Running a business is a hard job, and extra legislation makes it harder.
Okay. Paul Fletcher, your side of politics is against this. You've said you'll repeal it if you are elected. Why do you think it needs to be repealed? Well,
firstly, whenever Tony uses his reasonable voice, be very be on alert, frankly, because, you know, he said, oh, well, if somebody's got the codes, it's fine. Look at the actual words of the legislation, which I might add was put in without consultation with any employer groups. It was put in at the last minute after a deal was done with the Greens. There wasn't proper consultation on how this is going to work. So it's not even clear, for example, if an employer texts somebody to say there's an extra shift tomorrow or next day, do you want to do that? It's not even clear whether that'll breach the provisions.
Yes, it is.
Don't forget that there are significant civil penalties that are payable if you breach this. And by the way, the first version had criminal penalties. So he's sounding very reasonable, but this is something that was done in a rushed and irresponsible way. But fundamentally what it does is it breaches the trust that in good businesses and with good employees builds up between people. The fact is that the flexibility of being able to step out of work, to take an elderly parent, to a doctor, to pick up a child from school is something that is now feasible because your boss knows that they can get you if something is urgent on the phone. So many of those flexible arrangements people have arrived at in a very sensible fashion. This rigidity will add cost, add complexity, and we'll see good businesses incurring costs and being, frankly, discouraged from treating employees with the flexibility that many of them already do.
Paul, do you think people should work for free?
No, I don't think people should work for free, and I don't think that's, frankly, a very, you know, putting words in people's mouths is not a good way to deal with a serious issue. No, I don't think people should work for free. Of course I don't.
No, neither do I.
We've got to go back to the root cause here, which is there's like a second epidemic of burnout. And I think what we're trying to do is to protect workers, right? If we think about protecting workers and saying, do we have a fair balance of work and remuneration and reward and a fair amount of personal time to do your own thing, I think the intent behind the policy is great. Questionable whether it was done in the right way, but if the intent is to say, when you finish your work, you can have reasonable time to be a human, for me to be a dad outside of work and not be distracted, I think that's a good thing if we can find a way of finding that balance.
But does it have to be in the law?
I think you need something there. You need something there that can be defended, because right now we keep on going back 20 years, and we've already agreed that 20 years ago the world was very different. So the modern leadership we require right now is a new muscle, and not every business has it. So whilst we're growing that muscle, we might need some policy and structure to give ourselves the chance.
Okay,
that's the point. It's technology.
I just want to, Simon, thank you for putting your question to us. I just want to go to you, Carolyn, if I can. Do you think it's a necessary right, and would your workers want to use it?
Yeah, I think there's this whole thing about treating workers as adults and actually being good managers. So a good manager is going to let a worker go off and take an elderly parent to a doctor's appointment. But, you know, I have a signature, and lots of people, we give everyone at Carmen's an option to say, I've sent this email at a time that suits me. I don't expect you to reply until it's a time that suits you. So there's an expectation in your organisation. And if you're setting that, and it's got to come from the top down, and I do think there is a sense that sometimes there's organisations that think that people should be working 24/7.
Yeah.
And so I think there's, you know, organisations have to take some responsibility around that. You know, if someone is an early bird and wants to work early, or if someone says, do you know what, I want to do the school drop-off, but I'm very happy to log back on and do that bit of work there. It's about outcome rather than necessarily...
So that's the way you run your business, because presumably it's about worker retention and making it like your holiday plan is that, you know, can I work for you? Joking.
But Carolyn, you've created a culture where people want to work and are treated like adults, and in return deliver great work. You have really high retention.
But do you think it needs to be the law?
Yes, I do.
Yes, because laws aren't written for the good employers.
Yes.
Like, we don't need them for the good employers. We need them for the
And your concern, Paul, is, because obviously there's a couple of people who are in business here who say that this is the way to treat workers. Your concern is that it will be misused?
Our concern is that, number one, the process in getting to it was terrible. Because
but beyond the process,
when you
the
say
law
beyond
itself
when you say beyond the process, because there was not consultation with businesses about how this is going to work in a practical sense. But secondly, despite the minimising tone from the Minister, the simple fact is that companies that breach this, employers that breach this, are exposed to civil penalties. There's nothing in it which talks about, oh, well, it's fine if it's a code that's urgent. Nobody's disputing the principle that there are times that people are employed to work for, and there are times when people are on their personal time.
But if they're being interrupted, this gives them the right.
But the question is whether it is desirable to bake that into the law with all of the rigidities that come with it in a way that was not properly considered, not properly consulted on.
But what's the worst case scenario? What could happen?
Well, one of the things, frankly, that a lot of business in Western Australia, for example, are very concerned about is Western Australia is 2 hours behind 3 hours at other times of the year, that you could have significant times when those in one state are not free to speak with fellow employees in another state. There's a lot of practical consequences.
With your workers.
The West Australian example became very prominent because it appeared on the front page of the West Australian newspaper as a problem that would hit West Australian businesses. Guess what the West Australian newspaper have in their own enterprise agreement? A heading, right to disconnect. They've got the clause in their own agreement.
I think we've got to choose if we treat people like resources or humans, and I think the modern work era means that we should treat them like humans, and humans deserve the right to disconnect.
OK. We'll keep this discussion going tonight with a question from Acela Fernando.
Hi, I'm an engineering manager at a large resources company, and I've witnessed the automotive industry disappear from Australia. How is the future Made in Australia program sustainable, and are we really addressing the root cause of why manufacturing left our shores?
Sally.
Well, the Made in Australia Act is really about backing ourselves, but also about being sustainable and having good jobs into the future. And it's in a particular context. And you'd know the context at the moment, right, is countries all around the world have plans to transition, the energy transition. We, as Australians, are really capable, we're really smart. We've got the rare minerals that the world needs. We've got renewables that the world needs. We can either decide to sit on our hands and do nothing and let the market decide, which means that we will lose out. Australian workers will lose out, our industries will lose out. It was a mistake to lose our manufacturing industry. We lost 200,000 jobs, but not just that, we lost the skills, we lost the capital. When the pandemic hit, we couldn't even do basic stuff anymore. This is about jobs in the future that are going to be good paying jobs like the ones you've got, and for our whole country to be part of something that's exciting into the future. I think it's an excellent...
Acela, are you worried about manufacturing having been lost from Australia?
Oh, yeah, I thought when seeing it disappear from Australia, I was really sad, especially even touring the Toyota plant in Altona, speaking to the workers there. They're very proud of what they did, and they had to explain this is the last engine I'll ever put together in Victoria. So I'm concerned about, can we sustain the level of investment that's required to build the manufacturing industry again in Australia? And are we actually addressing some of the things like energy costs for industry to keep going or keep manufacturing? We have raw materials. We've got a lot of talent in this country as well. I just don't know if we had the glue to sort of bring it together.
OK, so you're worried that it will be a short-term investment and it won't be sustained?
Correct.
Well, Paul Fletcher, I mean, there could be a change of government. What would you do?
Well, if we want to encourage manufacturing and more economic activity in Australia, and of course we do, then there are some things that would be very good principles. Let's have lower taxes. Let's have lower energy costs. Let's have a less complex and costly industrial relations system. All of those things would make it easier for businesses to invest in new ventures, manufacturing or otherwise. But what Made in Australia actually seems to mean is politicians picking winners. So $1 billion being spent on solar panels. Now, solar is great, but the question is, can we be cost competitive in making solar panels, or will that be $1 billion of taxpayers' money that gets wasted or vaporised because politicians are not very good at making these decisions? Or the decision we've just seen to spend $940 million on Psi Quantum, an American quantum company. So this is a very significant investment. Went a terrible process. There are Australian quantum companies that are commercialising technology here. They were not given the chance to participate in a public process. It was all behind closed doors. They were required to sign confidentiality agreements, and it looks like yet another example of this government and politicians choosing to put money into a particular company or companies.
So you don't think any of this public money should be given to any of these?
The risk is that when politicians make these choices, public money gets wasted because they make bad choices. What is much better is to focus on having the right business conditions, lower taxes, simpler industrial relations system, lower energy costs. Energy costs are going up under this government. They promised they would go down. And if you want to look at the kind of things that can go wrong here, look at Solyndra, which was a solar manufacturer that the Obama government in the US, Obama administration put money into, and they lost several $100 million because the company went bankrupt. That is the risk when politicians are making this choice.
I think there is a risk, Tony Burke. You acknowledge that, right? Some of them may hit the wall. They won't be able to commercialise. There'll be mistakes.
Oh, the challenge is what is the alternative? So the issues that Paul just went through, if you want lower energy prices, the last thing you do is shift to nuclear reactors. If you wanted... the saying simpler industrial relations is code for competing on lower wages.
Cutting wages.
That's what that's code for.
OK.
It might just simply be code for going back to the approach of the Hawke and Keating governments, because the problem with the current government is they have taken industrial relations back to the 70s. Now, we had a Labor government in the 80s and 90s that understood these issues, that moved away from picking winners, that reduced tariff barriers and produced the productivity benefits that we saw through the 90s, added to by the GST.
You told the car industry to leave the country.
And now we are going backwards. You know what? We were spending $2 billion a year in annual subsidies for the car industry, and Australian car purchasers today have more choice than they did before. Only about 14% of cars sold in the last few years of the car industry were Australian cars because consumers had chosen.
OK, fair enough. So no regrets about that decision?
No, not at all. It was absolutely the right decision for Australians.
OK. Tony Burke, my question was specific, which was, do you accept that you may waste public funding because you end up investing in things that don't work out?
I don't accept it to waste, because what you end up doing across the entire suite of investments is making sure that we make things here again. If a government, as the previous government that Paul was part of, could make an active decision to tell industry to leave our shores, which is what the car decision was.
That is completely wrong.
Yes.
All we did was said, we're not going to give you a subsidy.
Okay.
No,
if you want to
Joe
keep
Hockey
building
stood
and
up in
making
question
money,
time and told them to leave. I was in the room, you were in the room, it was all on television.
I think I was in the press gallery watching. Carolyn, you employ lots of people and you make stuff.
Yes, I make stuff in Australia.
And people eat it.
And
so the question is, would you have enjoyed one of these grants?
yes. And so what I want to say, I started my business 31 years ago. Everything I have is made in Australia. We export to 32 countries now. And that would not have happened without the government support. Austrade supported me in all of these trade shows. They have supported me for 30 years in getting our export business to where it's got to.
So that's for the international market?
That's for the international market.
But in terms of a start-up to get it going, did you do that alone or was that government help?
That was government help. That government has helped me for 30 years in getting our export to where it is now.
And nobody's questioning the wisdom of things like the export market development grants, which I think is the Austrade policy you're talking about. And, you know, Atlassian will also talk about, I'm sure I've heard Scott Farquhar talk about it, how important that was to the growth of Atlassian. So targeted investment to support private businesses that are building and then to do specific things like assist them to approach export markets makes sense. Spending $940 billion to take a punt on an unproven technology. Yes, they're well advanced in terms of the research, but nobody knows which way quantum is going to go.
Intellectually, I wonder, what is the difference, though? It is public money going to
I think we need to, at some point, ground it in 2024 and ahead. And I think we can look back. But if you look at today, Atlassian's a manufacturing company. We don't manufacture things, we manufacture software, right? 95% of our sales are around the world, and we have a huge Australian presence in doing that. And so when you look at the R&D tax benefits, you look at the amount of venture capital that's been invested in the last 20 years, Atlassian, Canvas, Safety Culture, CSIRO, huge amounts of organisations have benefited from that. And so I think we need to take an approach to the future of work, future industries, future technologies, and say, where does it make sense to place a bet? And I think we have to do that now. Atlassian wouldn't exist without the government decisions that got made 20 years ago. I'm not a politician. I won't be in my livelihood.
You want to remain a happy person.
Yeah. I've chosen happiness instead. But the interesting thing is we have to find a way of placing sensible bets. And I think some of them, we can redress them as learnings, reframe them. There will be mistakes along the way, but we have to look at future tech, and it's going to be complex.
OK, so you think it's an investment worth making, but there are risks.
There is no sure thing right now. If you look at artificial intelligence, you look at the rate of change in technology, I'm a futurist, I do not predict the future. We cannot. What we can do is start to look at directional things that are happening and place those sensible bets and nurture them. Right? That's why we have great leaders in power that we appoint to say, do this on our behalf. But we can't keep on looking back 20 years or 25 years or 30 years and think, I need people to clock in and clock out and everyone's at home. Like, we're living in a different era now, and we have to face into that so that we can compete on a global scale. We're not in a local market anymore.
Sally?
There's also a big risk doing nothing. Like, that is actually a decision as well, doing nothing. And that is a risk to us in terms of jobs that we will lose, that won't be here. These will be jobs that are well-paid jobs. This is advanced manufacturing we're mainly talking about. The knock-on effects for that for a whole generation, and of course, the energy transition. Like, if we don't do those things, the risks and the costs will be much higher.
OK. A different topic now, and I'd like to bring in Frank Gaffer.
I've seen both the sites at both Monash and University of Melbourne, and the encampments there are peaceful. These protests are no different than any protests against war in previous decades at universities. And so my question is, why can't we acknowledge that the imminent ground invasion of Rafah would be in a violation of the ICJ's interim judgment in January to protect Palestinians in the occupied Gaza Strip from genocide? And why aren't our media focusing on what can be done to stop that, rather than stopping peaceful student protesters?
OK. And those deliberations are still going. Those ICJ deliberations could take years. But it's a really interesting question about, well, it's twofold, as I hear it, about the encampments across the country, but also the impending invasion of Rafah.
Yeah, and a whole lot of this has been unfolding today. We're gravely concerned and gravely worried about this. The foreign minister's put out a statement probably after a lot of you left to come here tonight, saying again for Israel to not go down this path. There's 1.3 million people in a very small area who went there because they were told it was safe. And there is now serious hunger issues. The concept of telling 100,000 people now up and move, there are huge risks with this. I haven't met anybody who doesn't say that they want the hostages released. People want the hostages released. But it has to be possible for us to say the toll on civilians needs to stop. And the only thing that I'd add to what you say about the media coverage, part of the problem that we have around the world with the media coverage is the reported death of something like 100 journalists, or killing of 100 journalists, means getting accurate information on the ground in the way that it would ordinarily be possible isn't happening there at the moment as well.
OK. On the encampments, which have become very, very politicised, the coalition, I'm going to go to you, Paul Fletcher, on this, but has called for them to be broken up by police. Tony Burke, do you support that?
No, I think we have to have peace. We have to allow peaceful protest. It has to be peaceful protest, and when I say peaceful, that doesn't just mean non-physically violence. There ought not be hate speech either. All of that matters. OK, some Jewish students are saying they're concerned about some of the slogans, from the river to the sea. There are others. Do you think they're problematic slogans? Oh, that slogan is something that I wouldn't use because I support a two-state solution. And that while some people who use that slogan say that they support two-state, it's usually taken by people to not mean that. Historically, it's been used since the 1970s, sometimes by, like the Likud Party have used it as a slogan in slightly different words, but effectively the same slogan, to say it should all be Israel. If it's used to say the whole area should be one state, that's not our position. We believe in two states. When I think of hate speech, though, I think of some much more horrific direct comments that have been made, which obviously I'm not going to repeat on television. No. But I think, the physical just marching in and breaking up, if a protest is peaceful, the reality is it just escalates the situation, makes everything worse. But we are a country where we should be able to have peaceful protest, and we should be able to accept that there'll be very strong, passionate views that will be different. And on a university campus of all places, that should be okay.
Okay. Paul Fletcher, your side of politics, including the shadow Education Minister Sarah Henderson, has called for the police to be called in and for these camps to be basically moved away from campus. Why do you think that's necessary?
Well, let's remember how this started, an unprovoked terrorist attack which caused 1,200 people to be killed, men, women and children, hundreds of people taken as hostage, many of them still kept hostage in Gaza today. Hamas could bring this to an end by releasing the hostages, but they are engaging in the most cynical and deplorable conduct. And at the same time, what we are seeing and hearing, and I'm hearing it from my own Jewish constituents, I represent the electorate in New South Wales with the second biggest Jewish community, and my constituents are concerned for their safety, and the extent of anti-Semitism we're seeing at the moment is extremely troubling, and we need to have order maintained. We need Jewish students to be able to move around campuses. We need students of every background.
Okay, is there any evidence that Jewish students can't move around campuses in Australia? I know there's an adjacent conversation going on in the US, but I'm talking about our campuses. Is there evidence that Jewish students aren't safe physically on campus?
We need campuses to be a place of safe and respectful conduct, and we are not seeing that at the moment.
So you don't think Jewish students are safe on campus?
I am aware of direct concerns about safety expressed to me by my Jewish constituents. I don't think that's a contentious proposition. Jewish Australians are feeling very unsafe.
Yeah. Tony, they are, but then the protesters say we have a right to protest. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, first of all, and I think it's really important we don't become competitive in the sense of all forms of bigotry are repugnant and offensive. Anti-Semitism, a whole lot of people are experiencing anti-Semitism at levels they have never experienced before in their lives in Australia, and that's real and it's wrong. Islamophobia is also at a huge peak at the moment, and it's real and it's wrong. And so that's why I say when something is clearly hate speech, when something is clearly bullying, and I've called it out when it's happened in my own electorate as well, we need to be very, very clear that everybody needs to be safe. So yes, I have heard the examples of people being bullied in lecture theatres, being photographed if they won't stand up and declare support and things like that. None of that should happen.
But if it is happening...
But I don't think the answer is to say everybody peacefully protesting, we're now going to go after all of you. I don't think you get to that point. I think we need to be a mature enough nation that where hate speech occurs, we target that without losing being a nation where people can also respectfully take a stand on something they passionately believe in.
Carolyn, how do you see it?
For me, I make muesli bars. It's not my world, but I just feel really sad that we're in this situation. Yeah. It feels super sad, and there's just so many people who, are really hurting at the moment. And I know in the area where I live, Jewish students, they don't wear their school uniforms when they leave school. They wear casual clothes because they're scared of their safety. And I think that in this day and age, I mean, I heard a story of a friend the other day, and there was a girl in an Uber, and she had her Star of David, and the Uber driver just pulled over and said, "Get out of my Uber," and kicked her out. And so and I just feel
This
like
is
there's so much
school
hate.
student.
No, this was actually an adult. This was a mum.
A mum kicked out of an
and-
Uber.
Yes, because she had a Star of David on. So I just feel like we just don't want this hate, and we don't want to live this life where there is just so much hate that is bubbling up.
Can I just pick up on that point? I think that is really important. We are one of the world's most successful multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic nations. That hasn't happened by accident. It's because we've all worked really hard at it for 30, 40, 50 years, and now more than ever, we all need to work really hard at that.
If I could just quickly get you on the actual potential ground incursion into Rafah, is that something you're concerned about?
The situation in Gaza is obviously a deeply challenging one. I'm not going to add to the comments that have been made on the coalition's behalf by, our leader, by our Foreign Affairs spokesman. It's a very complex issue, but I go back to what I started with. Hamas is holding innocent Israeli civilians hostage. And if they were serious about peace, the first thing they would do is release those hostages.
If you're just joining us, you're watching Q&A Live with Tony Burke, Paul Fletcher, Sally McManus, Dom Price and Carolyn Creswell. Lots to get to tonight. Here's Michelle Matrevska.
Prime Minister Albanese said there's been a rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia that we need to promote social cohesion. As a secondary school teacher, I have noticed an increase in not only anti-Semitism within the classroom, but a desire to side with political ideologies purely based on religion at hand, rather than understanding what the issue or cause is about. How do we educate children around the idea that associating a particular religion as a majority is incorrect, and shift the focus on understanding that extremist views and dictatorship can be found in any religion, person or entity?
Michelle, I just want to find out, obviously you've worked with young people and observed this. What have you observed that's so concerning to you?
Well, basically around my question, so students are just basing a religion and a stereotype. So, they refer to people just as Jews or Muslims. And you have to explain to them that it's a religion, that's not people, okay? They need to understand that not all of these countries believe in the same thing, or all these religions believe in the same thing. It's their political ideologies, they're part of dictatorships that are mimicking things from the past, and that in any religion or any place in the world or any city, any suburb, extremist views can be found anywhere.
And are they being radicalised online? Is there something you've observed? Because as you know, that's a big discussion at the moment.
Definitely. So, we were talking before about, having to switch off. Students don't switch off in the class. Even though they have, a mobile phone policy, they have their laptops. They can access TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat on a web browser.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, that old people thought, we'll take the phones and there'll be no TikTok. It's hilarious that old people are in charge.
Yeah.
Because they get it anywhere.
Oh, it does, yeah. You can see it, you can hear it. You see them switching, slides or, control tab.
And you think extremist content is being seen by young people?
Of course. I mean, one particular issue the ABC reported about was Andrew Tate's, misogynistic views, okay? And that's something that's spoken a lot in classrooms, especially by, young boys. And we've also seen in the media recently that's come about as well, with one of the schools in Yarra Valley being pinpointed just yesterday.
Yeah. A really important topic, thank you. Paul Fletcher, if I could just get you on that, because you've been coming up with some ideas around the online treatment of this. Do we have to be tougher regulators to stop young people being radicalised, whether it's misogyny or, Islamist extremism or whatever it might be?
When we were in government, we had a series of things that we did. We introduced the e-safety commissioner. We introduced laws against so-called revenge porn, which is a terrible and very unfair term. And we introduced the Online Safety Act in 2021, which brought together a number of the powers that already existed. So the E-Safety Commissioner plays a very important role. The principle must be that the rule of law has to apply online as well as offline.
And do we need tougher laws online?
Well, you know, there are very significant powers that the E-Safety Commissioner has. So, for example, she can issue an order in relation to violent content, so-called Class 1 content, or the equivalent if it was, say, a movie, something that would be given a refused classification for extreme violence. Right now, of course, she's issued one of those orders against X, formerly Twitter, and that's going to be tested in the court. The next court hearing is on Friday. So I'd argue that there are pretty extensive powers that she's got. Some of these are in early days of being exercised, and so the court process will test the validity of those powers and the particular
And if we
exercise
fail, do we need to beef them up?
Well, let's see how it plays out first.
Well, you'd like us to win?
We certainly back the Safety Commissioner.
Yep.
We established that office. We think Julian Mangrana is doing a good job.
But some on your side say it's gone, there's too much attacks on freedom of speech. That's not your view?
No. You do need to carefully balance up freedom of speech, and we were very careful in the drafting of the Online Safety Act, and I believe that the powers that are there are important. And the key principle is if we have a regime, as we do, to regulate the kind of content that you can see in movies or on television, and certain material which is so violent or so sexually explicit that offends community standards is rated R or is rated X or is rated refused classification. We can't just say, oh, well, on the internet we won't worry about any of that. That's not acceptable. Now, how you achieve that has been hard work for governments over quite a few years, because the internet exploded out of nowhere in the 90s, and very quickly you had 1 billion and then several billion people on it. But governments have been slowly catching up, and the Australian Online Safety Act is part of that.
OK, and you, just quick answer on this, do you want to get to a bipartisan position to try and deal with some of these issues?
Oh, I don't take issue with what Paul just went through. I mean, the challenge is exactly what Paul just said at the end there, which is technology will always move faster than legislation.
Well,
and
yes.
the end point here is, you know, for a whole lot of these different forms of horrific content, it's not just do you want to make sure that you don't have young eyes in particular on them, or any for some of the content, but how do you do that? So there's trials that we're now running, but yeah, it's a race, but it's important. It's really important.
I want to hear now from Marie Hereth.
Today there are a myriad of artificial intelligence platforms to enable or possibly replace positions. What could the workplace look like in the next 12 months if organisations and people adopt AI?
Sally, are you worried about this?
I think that AI is going to make a big impact on jobs and on workplaces. It's hard to say where it's going to end up, but it is something that we are concerned about. Going on from the previous conversation, technology in itself isn't good nor bad. It's about how it's used, and it's about what protections we put in place. So social media could be good, or it can also be bad. I think this will be exactly the case with AI. If we just leave it to the tech billionaires and to governments overseas, as we've seen, to make up the rules about what we see and how we see it, or for this matter, how it's programmed, what data goes in, what decisions it's allowed to make, and we don't say we need to put humans at the centre of it, in this case workers at the centre of it, it won't drive good jobs. It could do things like de-skill people. It could mean that, you know, the machine will decide that you're sacked, not a person. And so we need to make sure as a country that we're putting workers' voices at the centre, first of all, because if we're not heard, if workers aren't heard in all of this, it will be basically the tech billionaires that will make the decisions, and I can tell you those decisions will be in their interests, which is fair enough, not in the interest of people. So we should be prepared to legislate where necessary so that, you know, the people's voices are heard on this, to make sure it ends up being a good thing for us, because there's a lot of good things possibly with AI. a lot, and we want to see us go that way, not the other way.
Dom, is there going to be mass redundancies in our country?
Yeah, I think we need to move from with AI, it's here. I used it this morning. I returned from the US. I missed a whole lot of meetings last week. I pressed a button. It summarised those meetings and gave me a 5-minute digest of a 1-hour meeting. So
amazing.
It exists, right? I think our challenge is twofold. One is, how do we understand the use cases so that we can get benefit from it, right? And that benefit needs to be for society, for humans, for families, for workers, right? We live in a capitalist society, for business, for the economy. Like, everyone needs to benefit. And I think we sometimes stray down one. How can we make ourselves more productive and better markets? And we forget about the humans that should be very much part of the consideration, and so far haven't always. I think the real challenge, though, is if we approach this as Australia, we'll lose. It's a global market, right? So we can make some great rules locally that protect ourselves. If that means we can't do business on a global scale, we're going to miss that. Now, the question was about jobs in the next 12 months. Everyone's job's going to be impacted by AI in the next 12 months.
Like significantly?
Everyone's job will be impacted by AI in the next 12
OK, but there are different scenarios. Like, it could make your job better or you could lose your job.
But we need to do it on purpose. So the real challenge is reskilling. Because there's going to be disruption, either on a small scale or a massive scale. There will be disruption, and our job as a business society, as politicians, as union members, as business leaders, is to say, how do we reskill people so they can get access to meaningful employment? Because we can look down that scenario right now if we choose to, or we can stick our head in the sand and hope for the best, and it happens to us.
Are we sticking our head in the sand at the moment?
I'm not hearing enough conversations where politicians, business and education are coming together and saying our education system was built 100 years ago. My kids that will join the education system in the next 4 years, that system is not equipped to get kids out in 18 years that are ready for the workforce that they'll go into. Fact.
Carolyn, how are you using AI?
The only thing that I would sort of disagree with Dom is I think that AI really impacts jobs that are from your shoulders up. So if you are out, you know, you're working in a hospital, you are, you know, building roads, I think that's very different in the impact than...
Ooh, he's about to disagree with you!
However, I use AI all the time. For example, every meeting I go to, AI is plugs into the meeting. It takes all the minutes, summarises it, does it far better than anyone else. I think we need to be excited by AI. I think we want to embrace it. I think it is the biggest revolution we can.
How can people get excited when they have so much fear, though?
Play with it.
Yeah.
It's there. It's free. You can go. Anyone in this room, anyone watching, can go and play with ChatGPT right now.
Yeah.
Write a poem. Write a Mother's Day card.
They don't write very good poems.
There you go. You can play with it and try it and start to see what the opportunities are. Because I think when we do that, to Karen's point,
Carol,
so are you ways I use it?
Yeah. So it does all your minutes.
For example, if you're doing a position description, you'll say, well, if I was wanting the role to be a financial controller, what would a position description look like? If I was wanting it to be the CFO, what would it look like? And then you can sit down, you might have given it 3 different positions, and you'll say, this is the difference if I hired this person to hiring this person. That's what, I mean, that's one of the big things that we use. Putting a speech in is unbelievable. You'll say, make it funnier, make it shorter, make it, you know, it's unbelievable at speech writing. So I am a huge fan.
Does that mean we're going to end up seeing speeches that have actually been written by robots?
Definitely.
Yeah.
They're going to be boring.
Do you worry about that?
Can I just add that I think the idea that we had an era before AI and suddenly AI has arrived, I don't think that's quite right. We've actually been using it for quite a few years. Predictive text on your smartphone is AI. And there are already great Australian companies that are doing things that couldn't be done before. It's a company called Harrison AI, which supports radiologists. So the scanning process, you know, there's a backlog of scans in public hospitals. You go and have your scan, then it can take a while before a radiologist gets to it. They now say that they are used in about 20% or 25% of radiology practices across Australia. So this is supporting specialised humans, in this case radiologists, to do what they do, but give them, you know, essentially extra capacity.
OK. Here's a question now from Nessie Sayer.
Hi, I've worked in industries such as hairdressing and disability support. Why aren't these industries valued and paid respectfully for the critical work they do looking after our society's most vulnerable people?
Carolyn, do you wonder about all of those industries. I mean, you've got your own business, but there's a big discussion about like the disability sector, childcare sector, frontline domestic violence sectors being underpaid. Is that something you think we should address?
Look, it's a little bit different because I'm not, once again, I go back to the bubble that I live in. But I do think that when we look at, the gender pay gap and what we are hoping, I have 4 teenagers, what I'm hoping that will be the life and the reality for them, we're on a journey and we have got to keep going on this journey. We have to keep looking at the statistics and we have to keep focusing because it's just, if we don't, we're just not going to progress to get to the equality that many European countries have already got to.
It's definitely the case that care industry jobs, like the job that you're doing, has been undervalued, and there's been a lot that's been looked into. And one of the things that's come out is that why have we undervalued disability care or aged care or early childhood educators? It's because they're feminised, which just basically means it's completely dominated by women, and those caring jobs used to be done for free. And so as a society, we didn't value them. Then all of a sudden, we've got very skilled professionals doing this work that society absolutely needs, and we're not valuing it. And we're not valuing it, and it just means that those workers are not getting equal pay. They're not getting the pay that they deserve. We've seen aged care workers get a very good increase, and it was about time they got it, and that was supported by the government. That's excellent. And it's got to be early childhood educators, childcare workers that get it next.
Can I ask you a specific question? And it goes to the big conversation we've been having as a country around domestic violence. There are only 30 domestic violence workers for the front line that have been employed by the states, even though the federal government has provided spots for 500. There are some people saying it's because of how much they're paid and retention. Is that your view?
Well, I don't think it's very surprising that you can't just magic up like 500 domestic violence workers. Like, they're trained, they're educated, they're already in jobs, and you're creating extra positions. These are valuable positions. It's going to take a while to fill those. Workers in that industry were the first to win equal pay, the community sector workers. They're paid a lot more than their other counterparts, of course, and we would always say they should be paid more, but I'm not surprised that it's hard to recruit those workers because we've got a skill shortage, and those are hard jobs, very hard jobs.
OK, so do we need to pay them more?
Of course we should pay them more.
Would it mean that we could employ more of them faster?
No, I question that. Like, it takes time to train people up, it takes time. There's, a whole demand for people in this area right across, hospitals and the community sector elsewhere. I don't think it's surprising it takes a while to find skilled workers.
OK. Our final question tonight is from James Lee. Hi, James.
Hi. I worked at an IGA from when I was 15 to when I left school at 18. Despite working there for 3 years, I didn't earn a single dollar of superannuation because workers under 18 don't earn superannuation unless they work more than 30 hours a week. My question's for Tony Burke. Is the government going to commit to making sure super is paid on every dollar a young worker earns?
Straight up, we don't have a commitment on that, OK? So, answer that straight. Things that we have done that won't have helped you before you're 18, but will matter now. The superannuation guarantee is still on its way up to 12%. Payday super we're dealing with that so that it'll start to be, instead of it being paid each month or sometimes only being paid very late, it's being paid at the same time as your pay, which will make a real difference. And the other thing that didn't get a lot of publicity with our wage theft laws, but we included superannuation underpayments within the wage theft laws.
OK, but no guarantee for the actual thing he's asked.
I started with that.
You didn't hide it, it's true. You said no. James, you'd like him to commit to it. Why do you think it's so important?
I think it's really important, first of all, because that's potentially, I think studies show over $10,000 that's going to be missing from a retirement fund when a worker retires. It also creates a heap of confusion for young people going into the workforce knowing what their entitlements are. And I welcome the wage theft laws. I'm a previous victim of wage theft. I had $15,000 stolen off me by a business in wages and superannuation as well later in life.
Have you got it back?
I did win that back with the help of my union, but I think that was partly because of my confusion working at the IGA. I didn't really know what my entitlements were going into my first job at 21 in a bar. I didn't know what I was supposed to be getting paid because of this confusion. And, you know, junior wages, junior rates, the different superannuation for young workers, I think that creates a lot of confusion. Part of my job now is going to schools and talking to school students about their workplace entitlements and superannuation. And it's hard to talk to people under 18 and say, these are what your entitlements are, but not in this case or not in that case. Or
Sally,
you know,
is that something that you're pushing for?
We want to see all workers paid on all the money that they earn, and that shouldn't depend on your age. So we want to see that fixed. It's very good. We have a universal superannuation system, but there are holes in it. That's one hole. Another hole is you don't get paid super if on overtime or shifts and things like that. So if you're a FIFO worker or a nurse, for example, you're being paid on your ordinary time earnings, which is your ordinary pay, not the extra bits. And so it means you're missing out as well compared to someone who works 9 to 5. So I think these are two really important areas where our super system can be strengthened even further.
OK, we're out of time. Thank you so much for your company. Thanks to our panel, Tony Burke, Paul Fletcher, Sally McManus, Dominic Price and Carolyn Creswell. Thank you for sharing your stories and your questions. Next week, I'll be with you live from Melbourne. Head to our website to register to be in the audience. It's always lots of fun. Thanks for being with us tonight. Good night.